Welcome to Unveiling Death. I am Rabbi Jeffrey Weil. The Uncertainty of When, a conversation with Cantor Stoehr. Stephen Stoehr has served as cantor of Congregation Beth Shalom in Northbrook, Illinois since 1988. He is past president of the Cantors Assembly. He is also primary author of A Minyan of Comfort, a guidebook for conducting services at shiva houses. Cantor Stoehr has also established a chevra kaddisha, which prepares bodies for Jewish burial. He's established a choir for adults with special needs. It's called Selah. And he volunteers to lead Friday Shabbat services at a memory care facility. And there's a whole lot more. Before we begin our conversation, I would love to hear from you, so please reach out to me at rabbiw14@gmail.com. And please follow Unveiling Death. Cantor Stephen Stoehr, thank you so much for talking to me for this episode of Unveiling Death.
I'm really appreciative of the fact that you've invited me to do so. I've listened to some of your other podcasts. I've been inspired, and I hope I can do a little bit of that myself.
Thank you. I'm sure you will, and we will together. So, as we've discussed, your parents had histories. I mean, your dad was a survivor of the Shoah, the Holocaust. Your mom had a stroke early. I mean, she was young. I think you said in her late 20s, perhaps.
Absolutely.
I'm wondering how those the consciousness of those facts of your parents' biographies affected your understanding of, I guess, fragility of life and of death as a kid.
Yeah, it had a huge impact on me. Both of my parents, as you mentioned, were in some ways uniquely impaired. My dad probably more so emotionally and PTSD sorts of memories, and my mom much more physically. And I think because of that and my sensitivity and love for them, I became sensitive to those who are vulnerable. And who more vulnerable than people who are dying or death in and of itself. I also grew up, which I think you can relate to, with dogs. And when you lose a dog, you understand what pain means.
Right.
And I think I was so surrounded with those realities, and also the fact that I shared my bedroom with my grandfather, my mother's father, who was a sickly man with heart attacks and constant ambulance visits to our home, falling down the stairs. And I just always had these images of doom, if you will, in my young mind. And the fact that my father had shared with me multiple stories about being in the Holocaust, surviving the Holocaust, losing family in the Holocaust. Yeah, I was led down I won't say a yellow brick road, but a kind of a dusty road.
A dusty road. Was it a dark road? I guess I'm wondering if you mentioned, a emerging sensitivity to people who are vulnerable because of these experiences and, your folks and your grandfather. But was it also, did it create anxiety, besides the sensitivity for others, did it create an anxiety for you?
Yeah, I don't think I was ever afraid of my own mortality. I was more concerned about others. Specifically, at one point, my mom, whom I became very attached to, she was a lovely and wonderful mom. And I went through a period in my fifth grade class, sixth grade class, something just was stirring within me. And every time I got on the bus, I'd cry. I'd get to school, I'd get into the payphone. I would call and just be worried that she didn't wake up in the morning. And so those things were just embedded in a way that I didn't understand, but I felt.
This was following her stroke, I assume.
Oh, yes. And she had her stroke in her 20s. She didn't marry until she was much later.
I see. One thing that your father would do, like you, he sang, and he would go to cemeteries, if I understood this correctly, and offer to chant the memorial prayer, the Amalei Rachamim, which means God full of compassion, for families who are visiting their loved ones' graves. And you, as a boy, would accompany him. Like I would on occasion go with my dad to his office and hang out there and sort paper clips and make copies, and he'd give me busy work. That was my experience accompanying my dad.
Right.
Yours was very different. It was at a cemetery, and this would happen. And did you find that strange? Did you find that just like completely normal? And did that give you, throughout your life, a sense of comfort around cemetery specifically and around death things, rituals, and so forth in general?
Yeah, it wasn't a regular thing. It was certainly around the high holy days or other times where people would come to the graves of their loved ones and pray in their memories. But it was an outing. It was an outing with my dad. I'd either go to the factory that he worked at or go to shul with him on the weekends or go to the cemetery and hang out with my dad. And we'd pack ourselves a little couple of bologna sandwiches, and dad would be out there trying to assist people in uttering the proper prayers at that point. And so to me, a cemetery just became a serene, tranquil place. Uh, and it taught me, I think, the reality of mortality, that this is where we're all going to end up if we're fortunate. Again, remember, my dad was a Holocaust survivor, and so many of his family perished on the roadside, in a furnace, in a mass grave.
Right.
Um, and to me, it was a beautiful statement, and through my father's explanation to me, that this is where people are laid to rest. And there's a saying when people pass away, we say "Hamakom yanachem etchem," et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which means may the place or the one who dwells in that place up high, we're referring to the Creator, God, bring you comfort. And my dad changed it around, and he said, "Hamakom yanachem etchem." The fact that this individual has a place to be laid to their rest is one of dignity and honor. It wasn't scary.
Yeah,
It
he
was
just
just part of
he
life.
re-emphasized the makom, hamakom,
Yeah.
from it referring to God to referring to the actual place where one is laid to rest. But I feel like I should clarify. Your dad was a fun, joyful person. Is that correct?
Oh, he was. Being a young teenager when the Holocaust was coming through the areas in which his families were living, um, he sort of left his childhood behind, and he lived the rest of his life in a very childlike way. I wouldn't say he was childish, but he was playful and fun, and um, that was on the outside. On the inside, it was a lot of sadness and nightmares at night, calling out for his mother and
Wow.
family. And but the fact that he could find the strength to have a humorous s- streak within him was a great blessing for me, and my mom and my sister, and uh, that helped us.
You used a phrase, the uncertainty of when. You mentioned this when you
Hmm.
spoke previously. That's a wonderful phrase, the uncertainty of when. And in other words, when will one die? And I'm wondering, given the sort of fragility of your loved ones' lives, I'm thinking your mom in particular, but also your grandfather, were you able to identify that sense of uncertainty at the time? In other words, could you say, like, I don't know when my mom will die and it might be soon? Is that what you were kind of putting your, or maybe able to articulate when you were in fifth and sixth grade and calling home? Or was it more a sort of a vague anxiety?
More so the latter, but I did have some sort of cognitive looming of or sensation that something is around the corner. You always know something's about to be around the corner, whether it's the Nazis coming into town, or whether it's a stroke, or whether it's a car hitting your dog.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I didn't have that terminology in my mind, uncertainty of when,
Mhm.
but I just had a sensation, maybe it's anxiety. I was never formally, taken in to get some help about all of that.
Did you use that phrase just for the first time when we were talking at Starbucks, or
It
have you?
was.
Oh,
No,
really?
first
Yeah,
time.
I really like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a book title right there. Um, I'm wondering also if that, because I have that anxiety. I have the uncertainty of when. For me, it's a real anxiety, um, and not for myself. And I'm wondering if there were times in your life or things in your life that would have happened that made that sort of more prominent in sharp relief, that uncomfortable uncertainty, or and were there times when it sort of receded and you find yourself going whatever months, years without really without it being prominent?
Yeah. Um, I don't go more than a half an hour without thinking about it.
Hmm.
I've never had a vacation from death.
Hmm.
The thought of it and so forth, and especially after we were blessed to have children, and you start to be concerned with, they're concerned, like my parents always, "Be careful watching crossing the street," etcetera, etcetera.
Yeah.
That fear from the time the baby is in a crib, they go, "Are they still breathing? Are they still crying? Oh, they're crying, that's good."
Yeah.
We know they're okay. We're always perseverating over the concern of the well-being of the ones we love,
Right.
and periodically, now and again, of course, concern for our own well-being. Am I taking care of myself,
Right.
as well as I should?
Yeah. Yeah. In the crib and in utero, even.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. So it's with you. It's just with you. Yeah.
Yeah, and now that I do it professionally, if you will, as a cantor, yourself as a rabbi, we bury a lot of people. We see a lot of people we know and love and have shared time with, and being part of a chevra kaddisha, I get very up close with those issues, and I just there's no way to get past it.
Right, right. So when you say up close with the chevra kaddisha, you are really close. So you created a chevra kaddisha, a holy burial society, or society of congregants who help prepare bodies for burial in the Jewish tradition. So you did that for your congregation, Congregation Beth Shalom. And what motivated you to do that? Um, and was the congregation always supportive?
Oh, yeah. The rabbis I was working with and the leadership of the congregation were always very supportive of something that remarkable, something that unique. I don't know that many, if any, congregants in our general area had their own chevra kadisha. There are community chevra kadisha, but I, given my perseveration, thought that if death was imminent, I might as well try to take some control over it somehow. And if it wasn't from a medical point of view, because I didn't go to medical school, how could I soothe the reality of death in some manner or level? And having this conversation was, in a way of weakening death, because being so close to it sort of became, I became a little anesthetized
Hmm.
to it, and I became less and less fearful or concerned about it because it became all the more real every time we met with somebody. And at the time, I was writing a couple of pamphlets. I've written a series of pamphlets for our congregation about death. What do you do when your parents pass and you have to close their apartment? How do you make that a sacred moment? What is the final thing that you should be saying when somebody is about to be taken from the home to the funeral chapel? What a number of different things. And that said, well, we're writing so much about this. Why don't we now do something about it? Right? It's naaseh vinishma, right? We are acting upon things that we think that need to be repaired
Right.
in the world. And so it used to be that, and maybe still is, that it's very common either for conservative Jews, Reform Jews, that when certain sacred moments come up, we turn to the Orthodox.
Right.
Whether it's a butcher, the shochet, somebody to write a get, somebody to make tefillin, to write a Torah service, to go to the mikvah, to do circumcision, whatever, we'd have to go always to the Orthodox. And I thought if we could create something in our own backyard, it would give us a bit more, justify our authenticity of being equal in so very many ways.
But the idea, so besides the mitzvah that you're doing for the deceased and for the deceased family, and also the personal sense of kind of inuring yourself in some degree, or sort of ratcheting down maybe some anxiety about death by being so close to it, anesthetizing, as you say. But there's also like this sort of internal Jewish communal um, empowering feeling, like we're taking this tradition that we have sort of usually outsourced to Orthodox or traditional tradition, and and claiming it.
Right, right.
Yeah,
And I think that the fact that the rabbi was giving me the authority to do so, and making me the Mara Da'atra, if you will, about this experience, chevra kaddisha, um, was another wonderful opportunity, at least for me, to express also that cantors are not simply singers. Singing is just the beginning, we like to say, but it gives again another sense of um, value to the community,
right.
a- and I feel very respected for it, and I'm glad that I made that move.
Right. Marda Atra is the chief decider on an area of Jewish law in a community. So you have been that.
And I've been blessed to help begin 3 other chevra kaddisha, these sacred societies, for other synagogues around Chicago area.
Hmm.
And it's been, again, extremely rewarding. It's given me a little bit of life out of death.
Life Out of Death could also be, that could be the name of the next book.
I'll put that
If
down
it
on my
works for
to-do
you, right?
sheet.
Exactly, on your to-do list.
Yes.
But so going back to the beginning of the Chevra Kadisha work, I am like, I think, so astounded by what I'm about to say, that I am not in any way incredulous, but it's still nonetheless unbelievable, and it's got to mean something. So the first two people that you had the opportunity to care for in the Chevra Kadisha fell literally to their deaths, and that was a couple decades ago, and it has not happened since. And of course, that's terribly tragic, and I'm not making light of it in any way. But I can't imagine that one wouldn't say, "What did that mean? That strange coincidence. What meaning do we glean from that, and what message do we take from it?" Do you have any thoughts about that?
So I do think that there was some message. I don't know if it was a godly message, but a message to us, or maybe a recheck over us that maybe we just weren't ready yet. Maybe there was a siman, a sign, some sort of message that was coming through that we just weren't ready to prepare that first preparation or care for the person.
And you didn't, correct?
And
That
we
first.
didn't. The first was a gentleman, the second was a woman. Um, Spiritually, maybe we were just too engaged technically with, like, okay, we know everything we have to do, and maybe we just weren't emotionally or spiritually ready. And maybe that's the reason we chose not to participate. I think it would have scared many of our people off if the first several people that we had to deal with were extremely damaged by their fall. And it's not the way I placed it before them when I explained to them what we would be doing.
Yeah.
So it was ominous.
There's omen and ominous. I mean, I'm also not, always thinking that God is, pulling the levers for every single terrible or great thing that happens to us. But sometimes a story like that, for some reason, it's really, really latches onto that part of me that thinks that maybe it really is some sort of message. But miyodea, who knows? During the Chevra Kadisha process, during when we prepare the body for burial, there are kavanot, things that direct our minds and hearts in the right place when we're doing something significantly holy. And so there are readings that one who does is involved in a tahara, preparing a body, um, they're spoken to the deceased. And my question for you: do you believe, on some level, that the neshama, that soul of that person, as that person, you know, as the actual person, hears in some way that we don't understand those kavanot, those things that you were saying to him.
Right. And I would only be in the room if it were a him.
Correct.
I do, however, attend all of the taharot, the preparations, male or female, just in case there's some halachic questions about the Jewish law, whether we should or shouldn't do certain things. But I do believe that the soul of the individual is still there with us. Tradition says that the soul doesn't leave the vicinity of the body until it sees the body being laid peacefully to rest and the family reciting the words of Kaddish. And once it knows that its life's partner, its dance partner, the soul and the body, has been respectfully laid to its rest, it can now ascend to the heavens and find its rest. And you may know as well as I that when we're with somebody who might be in hospice or a near to end of life situation, the medical team always tells us that the sense of hearing is the last thing to go, and we should continue to talk to that person and affirm our love for them and their permission to let go if they need to, and so forth. And I still believe that even in the preparation room of a tahara, that spirit is there and we are speaking to that person. Apologizing is a big part of tahara, of washing somebody and caring for them and dressing them in their shrouding. And we constantly apologize and say, if we happen to have done something that was insulting, that was hurtful, that by accident somebody's hand slipped and hit the table a little too hard, we're constantly speaking and communicating with that spirit uh, while we are embracing, cuddling, holding,
Mm.
caring for the body. And I kind of see the spirit smiling,
Mm.
just saying, you know what, thanks for taking care of my friend.
There is an actual handling, sort of embracing of the body when you're washing it and putting the shrouds on it and so forth. So there is an actual tender, sort of a tender physicality to this process.
Very much so, extremely so. We don't turn our back on the person. We don't talk about the baseball scores.
Yeah.
If you and I were across a table and you needed a towel or some item, I don't cross it over the person's body. I walk around and I hand it to you. Everything is treated as if that person was alive, and we want not want to disrespect them in any way by our behavior.
Right. So you mentioned what we often hear about is that the body, that the person who is dying can still hear even at a very late stage. And you are a cantor, so hearing, expressing through voice, and hearing obviously is a big part of your who you are. When you are on your deathbed, when your when is is happening, and it's no longer so uncertain, but it's imminent. And what do you want to hear, song or other sounds, as you lay dying?
I think I have an answer to it. Part of me, the jokester of me, wants to hear, the Bob Barker and The Price is Right going, Steve Stoehr, come on. I was going to say down, but I don't want to go down. So come on up. You're the next contestant. But I'd like to be in an experience where I have a time to close my book of life. I kind of fear sometimes that I will die of a tragic heart attack and not have a chance to say goodbye or to hear those sweet words that I would like to hear as I take my departure. But I think I'd like to hear the soft whispers of my family around me, my wife and my children, and God willing, more grandchildren, and whatever they might be saying. But just to hear that familiar voice and to take that last reverberation of sound with me, and I think it would make my soul dance on the way up if some of those words they were reciting were the Shema Yisrael, because then I know I would have been able to pass on the traditions that my father held so closely, and my mother, but more so my father was my Yiddish kite driver. And I know that I would have passed it over to the next generation, and they understood that. And that would be a nice send-off of peace.
Amen. Can't hear that song. Cantor Stoehr, thank you so very much. I've greatly, greatly enjoyed this conversation with you.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure, and you're the right person to have shared this with. You're a very sensitive soul.
Thank you. Many thanks to Cantor Stoehr. Thank you, my creative director, editor, and my son, Sammy Weil. Please share this episode and follow Unveiling Death. Thanks so much for listening to this podcast, Unveiling Death, Eternity in about 24 minutes, every other Monday.